Good morning, Joe, and thank you very much for letting me sleep on your couch and hide from President Putin. So tell me a little bit about this Oumuamua thing. Sure, no problem there, Sergey. Let me tell you one thing first and foremost. It's not aliens. Nope, it's an asteroid that came from an interstellar origin. It's strangely shaped and highly reflective, but definitely an asteroid that flew through our solar system and is on its way out. Joe, that is not true, because this asteroid, as you called it, accelerated out of the solar system far more than gravity would account for. Asteroids don't do that, so that explanation has been debunked. Right, and that's why we determined that this was actually a comet, an interstellar comet, and outgassing from this comet could account for the acceleration as it headed out of the solar system. So it's definitely not aliens, it's a comet. But Joe, this object was under observation from many instruments that are designed to detect cometary outgassing, and there was nothing. No debris, no gases of any kind. So this explanation was also debunked. Yeah. And so that's why we determined that this is definitely not aliens, but actually a hydrogen iceberg. Yeah. An iceberg comprised of pure frozen hydrogen, and that would not have shown up on any of our spectrographic analyses that we were taking of it at the time. Right, and Joe, a pure hydrogen iceberg exposed to cosmic rays for millions or billions of years would not survive. It was determined that the odds of a pure hydrogen iceberg surviving all of that time would be about the same as a volcanic eruption creating a fully formed space shuttle. So that argument was also debunked. Exactly, and so that's why we determined that it was definitely not aliens, but actually an iceberg made out of pure frozen nitrogen that came from the Kuiper belt of some nearby star system. Yes, but weren't some calculations made recently that said that at least 1,000 times the entire mass of the stars in the galaxy would be necessary to generate all of these exoplutos that would be necessary to build a nitrogen iceberg like this and just send it through our solar system? Wasn't this debunked also? Well, yeah, but it's definitely not aliens. But Joe, how do you know that it's not aliens? Because I just said very definitively that it's not aliens. Didn't you hear me say that? Yeah, but, hey, Sergey, would you like me to give President Putin a call and let him know exactly where you've been sleeping for the last few weeks since you made that huge mess in low Earth orbit? No? Then shut the So it's been more than 6 months since I've talked about Oumuamua, and I have to admit I'm still very angry about the subject, and let me tell you why. Look at the title of this article from Forbes magazine published on February 10th of 2021. New theory perfectly explains Oumuamua naturally. It's a nitrogen iceberg. That's a very, very confident headline, and guess what? It turned out to be not true. There doesn't seem to be a great deal of evidence to support the whole idea, as it has been widely accepted lately, that Oumuamua was indeed a nitrogen iceberg. Indeed, the whole reason that this theory came up in the first place is not because of any visual evidence that there was frozen nitrogen involved, but just because our instruments didn't show anything. Observation, you see nothing. Conclusion, it must be frozen nitrogen. Is that really how science works? Perhaps it would be best to go back to the beginning and determine why a small minority of very respected scientists are saying that Oumuamua is indeed an artificial object. In 2016, an object on a trajectory coming from outside the solar system at a very high velocity passed directly through the inner solar system at a very close distance to our own sun, and then rocketed back out of the solar system, and it was actually far beyond the orbit of our own planet before we detected it. It is highly reflective, it is strangely shaped, very elongated, and it also tumbles at a very predictable and constant rate. On top of that, it's not important to determine really what Oumuamua is, but rather what it isn't, and the kinds of conclusions we can draw from that. First of all, it's not an asteroid, and the reason we know that is because Oumuamua made its way out of the solar system at a substantially higher speed than gravity would account for. Now, granted, this wasn't a huge difference, but still, it made a difference of about 100,000 kilometers during our last observation. Now, if Oumuamua maintained this constant rate of acceleration, this strangely constant rate of acceleration, it would actually be more than 500,000 kilometers out of place by the time it reached the orbit of Saturn, which it already has, by the way, and it's also past the orbit of Uranus at this point. So it's probably close to 1,000,000 kilometers further out from the solar system than it should be, which can be explained by a comet. Cometary outgassing frequently leads to objects accelerating at a much higher rate than gravity would account for. However, we kept this object under very close observation with instruments specifically designed to detect any type of cometary outgassing, and we detected nothing. No dust, no debris, no gases of any kind. So once this was determined, the scientific community did their very, very best to come up with some kind of element that would not have been picked up by our instruments. Because when it comes to extraterrestrial technology, the scientific process gives way to more of a criminal investigation or criminal court kind of scenario. If you can introduce any kind of reasonable doubt, no matter how unlikely that doubt might be, then that becomes the official explanation for said phenomena, even if an artificial explanation is just as valid. As long as you have that reasonable doubt, the artificial explanation goes out the window. I can think of no other scientific discipline where this little evidence is needed to debunk a theory. And thus began the process of searching for the most improbable of scenarios. First of all was the whole hydrogen iceberg idea. I can't imagine that this thing actually got published. We have seen no evidence of any frozen hydrogen objects in the solar system or beyond for very good reasons. Hydrogen has a very, very low boiling point and can be easily destroyed not only by heat, but also by cosmic rays. A paper linked in the description that was published by Dr. Huang, I may be mispronouncing that, and Dr. Avi Loeb, conclusively proved that a hydrogen iceberg could not survive an interstellar journey under constant bombardment by cosmic rays. And so the theory moved on to frozen nitrogen, because after all, there's quite a few objects in the outer solar system that are comprised of frozen nitrogen, like Pluto and Charon, and probably a lot of objects in the Kuiper Belt. And so the argument was put forward that an object comprised of frozen nitrogen would not have shown up on our instruments, could have ended up being pulled out of another star's Kuiper Belt by various gravitational influences, and eventually ended up flying through our solar system. Now, this has a lot of problems, however. For example, the rate of tumbling involved. Oumuamua's rate of tumbling never changed, not even slightly. An uneven outgassing, which is something that would be consistent with a piece of frozen nitrogen. There wouldn't be a constant rate of outgassing that would never change. That would have impacted the rate of tumbling, and yet that tumbling rate did not change one bit, nor did its trajectory. That didn't change either. So many problems with this theory, and then finally Dr. Loeb and company came out with a paper recently where they did a mass analysis of how many frozen nitrogen icebergs would have to exist around every stellar system in order to account for something like this, that by the way has never been detected in our own solar system, to just come flying in purely by chance while we were watching. The authors of the paper pointed out that pure nitrogen is incredibly rare, only 0.5% of the total mass of Pluto, which is very well known for having frozen nitrogen ice. So to make an object like Oumuamua, which is anywhere from 400 to 800 meters long and 35 to 167 meters wide, would require more frozen nitrogen than has been projected to exist in the entire galaxy. Now, a debate is still raging as to whether or not Oumuamua might be a nitrogen iceberg, but really the evidence against this notion is getting to be overwhelming. However, as you can see here, the artificial explanation is becoming more and more compelling. Avi Loeb, together with other astrophysicists, have put together the idea of what kind of object could be moved away from the sun at the rate of speed that we've observed, propelled only by solar radiation. And it turns out to be a large, thin object, only a few millimeters thick as a matter of fact, something that would correspond to a light sail. An advanced light sail, more advanced than anything we've produced up to this point, but a technology that we both understand, something that could easily be manufactured by our technology in the foreseeable future, and something that fits all of the different variables. Extraterrestrial technology propelled by such a means would of course leave no debris, no gas in its wake, nothing that would suggest any kind of cometary outgassing, and that fits the observational data. On top of that, it could artificially maintain its rate of tumbling, so anything that would change this rate could be artificially adjusted for, just in conjunction rather with what we've observed, an object that tumbles at a very consistent rate all the time and never varies. And here's the most astonishing coincidence of all. Before Oumuamua came into contact with our sun and its gravitational influence, the math shows that it was traveling at a speed that is in conjunction with what's called the LSR, or local standard of rest. What that means is this object was stationary in conjunction with the rotation of the galaxy. Different stars orbit the galactic core at different speeds, and only 0.2% of these objects orbit the center of the galaxy at a speed that remains constant relative to the rest of the objects that orbit the galaxy. What that means is this object, before it came into contact with our solar system, would be incredibly useful for navigational purposes. Every bit as useful as a pulsar, perhaps even more so, because many pulsars do not orbit the center of the galaxy at this constant rate of speed, or LSR. So contrary to popular belief, Dr. Loeb does not believe that this object, Oumuamua, was any kind of probe designed to explore the Goldilocks zone of our solar system, even though this might have been a secondary objective. It moves far too slow for those purposes, and what you're watching right now is an animation of Breakthrough Starshot, an idea that Avi Loeb has also been pioneering that utilizes a massive laser array to drive a small light sail towards nearby stars at relativistic speeds. Obviously, Oumuamua does not travel at speeds that come anywhere close to this kind of speed. Although it is fast, we've launched probes that go even faster. Rather, what Dr. Loeb argues is that this object was sort of a navigational buoy. Such a buoy would be incredibly useful to interstellar travel. First of all, it would rotate at a very predictable speed, which means you wouldn't be able to confuse it for any other sort of naturally occurring object. And secondly, it would remain at a constant location relative to other stars in the galaxy, so you could navigate by it quite reliably, especially if there was a network of these things. And given that we've detected one of these buoys, assuming that that's what this is, in such a short amount of time, the few decades that we've been observing our own local solar neighborhood, that suggests that there is a whole lot of these things in the galaxy, many thousands of them actually, supporting a vast interstellar travel network. Now, of course, this is just one application for Oumuamua, but to those scientists who so quickly dismiss the idea that this is a light sail because it couldn't travel at relativistic speeds, that it would be useless as a probe, well, they're just not being very inventive. They're not thinking outside the box. There's no written law that says that a light sail would have to be used as a probe. It could serve at many other purposes as well. This buoy, for example, if you were dealing with an advanced alien technology with extremely good optics, could be used for navigational purposes, as I just said. And if you had a lot of these buoys in place, you could navigate between stars in the galaxy quite reliably. This would be an extremely good use for Oumuamua if it is an artificial object. And the evidence continues to pile up to suggest that that is indeed exactly what it is, because every other natural explanation that we've dug up on this particular object has fallen flat. Everything has been debunked, leaving only one possibility, at least currently. The best current explanation for Oumuamua is that it is an artificial object, not this pancake-shaped nitrogen iceberg. That now has been dismissed almost entirely, but rather a piece of alien tech either used for navigational purposes or perhaps a remnant of a more advanced ship that is in a state of decay, although it seems to me that it would be active still, simply because the rate of tumbling remained entirely constant the whole time that we had it under observation. It didn't change regardless of acceleration and other factors. That being the case, in my opinion, this is still an active piece of alien technology. So let's review what we have right now. This object came from outside our solar system. It is not an asteroid. It is not a comet. It is not a hydrogen iceberg, and it almost certainly is not a nitrogen iceberg. However, it accelerated utilizing a method that we do not yet fully understand, but can be explained if it is indeed a light sail, as Dr. Loeb has hypothesized. This is the most compelling explanation that we have right now, and the headline should be reading, at least currently, that the best explanation that we have for Oumuamua at present is that it is an artificial piece of alien technology. And this may change at some point in the future, but currently we have no natural explanations whatsoever that hold up under close scrutiny. That being the case, the artificial explanation needs to be the prominent one until it gets debunked by some sort of reasonable and plausible natural cause. Although what that natural explanation might be, I can't begin to imagine. But who knows? Something could come up in the future. But currently, the only explanation that checks off every one of the boxes is a light sail manufactured by a technology outside of our own solar system. As incredible as this may seem, it is the most likely explanation and the one that we should be embracing until we get other evidence to the contrary. But of course, this isn't going to happen. Virtually nobody has the courage to stand up and say something like this for fear of ridicule. As a matter of fact, this would be the best way to torpedo your own career if you were a young, budding astrophysicist arguing these sorts of things. Only people who have established careers like Dr. Loeb have a chance of saying something like this and still holding down a job. But it is vital that the scientific community begin to embrace the idea that this is the most likely explanation for Oumuamua. And if we detected something like this after only a few decades of observation, chances are more of objects like this are going to be passing through our solar system in the near future, and we need to be ready for it. We need to be prepared to react. And not only that, there's a good chance that other objects like Oumuamua might have ended up getting captured by our sun's gravitational pull and might be sitting lying in wait for us to just discover it if we actually invested the necessary time and money to go look. I think it would be time and money well spent. If you like this type of content and want to see more, you know how to support me. There are many ways to do so in the description, or a simple like and subscribe would help me a great deal as well. So until the media and the scientific community are willing to post headlines like the most likely explanation for Oumuamua is an artificial one, until they have the courage to actually tell the truth, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.